Marital relations after menopause or during pregnancy, is that venial sin? Aquinas basically says yes, and Alphonsus says no. But there's more to the story, and I'm going to create as much of a hermeneutic of continuity as possible between these two saints and break it all down so that there's no confusion, or hopefully none. I'm John Farrell, and this is Annulment Proof.
They gotta roll with the narrative. How many souls gotta perish? Just as Vincent Ferrerin. Innocent started sandwich, running in place like we chasing carrots. Wanna keep pushing, error my way. I'ma stay focused, St. Alphonsus. St. Alphonsus. St. Alphonsus. Wanna keep pushing, error my way. I'ma stay focused. St.
Keep pushing air my way. Boy, oh boy. I can relate. You know something? If you need to get to a little light rap song about St. Alphonsus, Enoch has a corner on the market. Where else are you going to go? Hey, he's got a little problem, though, because he's kind of an NFP guy. But it was reasonably cool. So listen, there is sort of a problem with this whole notion of what's the conjugal act for and when is it sinful and when is it not? And you have NFP in the mix just really goofing stuff up. Okay, this is why there's so much confusion today. There definitely is. I have my little friend here, shish kebab Telos, which I'm going to explain after a bit to help us get it super straight. All right, but just to back up what I'm saying about confusion, I want to show you a quick clip from Christopher Wagner, and he's going to basically admit what I'm saying, which is this does get kind of confusing. Let me say something else real quick. When I first made one of my first posts on Facebook was about NFP. When I was kind of figuring this out, I'm like, what's up with this NFP stuff? I said NFP should only be used as often as, like you can't go to church. Like if you have a grave reason to miss mass, you have a grave reason to use NFP. And I got 1,500 comments on that. And I started realizing, and after a while, I figured out, no, that's still not right. So it's easy to make little mistakes. And what am I saying? I'm saying that when I have said that it's always a venial sin for relations after menopause or during pregnancy, apparently that's not always true. And we got to go to St. Alphonsus. Now, he is definitely the man, okay? So you can't argue with St. Al and be right. You just can't. There's been a lot of Latin that where all his information has been, which a friend of mine named Jerome from Quebec, who speaks like this with his French accent, so it's a little tough, but we got through it and we translated a bunch. So I wanted to present that to you and show you how it differs a bit from Aquinas, but how we can basically read this so we, in light of, as they say. So it sounds a little Vatican II, you might say, like trying to put Trent with theology of the body and make it all nice. It's not quite like that. But again, we're going to have to get it straight. And it's not easy, but I have spent a lot of time with Alphonsus in the English, which I'm going to present to you. First, let me show you this quick clip from our friend Christian Wagner. Hold on.
I do also think that a lot more what you
check out his eyes. Look at Tim's eyes. It's funny.
A lot more what you
All right,
are.
Here we go.
What you're saying. But I do also think that I'm a mind who is synthetic. I want to take all of its different aspects and keep it together. Unfortunately, I have to go in a few minutes.
Yeah.
I want to keep everything together, but I want to keep together the conciliar, briefly 20th, 21st century's statements on, the unitive end, procreative end. They're in.
Okay, so he here is Wagner. Because Wagner's like, wait a minute, all these popes are saying pleasure alone is venial sin, and you've got Timothy Gordon saying the typical line today, which is, hey, as long as the nuts and bolts are in the right place, it don't matter what you're thinking, and it doesn't matter why you're doing it. This is where we've devolved into. So Christian Wagner here is like, I want to have everything be Catholic, and it can't really be done because the modernist stuff won't fit with the past. And again, we're going to synthesize Alphonsus with Aquinas. I'm going to try to work that feat here. I'm not exactly sure how we're going to do it, but hang on a second. All right, hermeneutic, let's go.
Separability, the good of spouses, et cetera, et cetera. I want to keep that, but I also want to understand how to, interpret the statements of the popes on, seeking for pleasure alone. I want to understand why the discipline of the church, even in the Catechism of Trent, heavily recommended periods of abstinence, especially before the reception of Holy Communion in order to...
See, he's like, yeah, because the church used to say, during Lent or different times, like no conjugal activity, whereas Timothy Gordon's like, yeah, more. It's all good. It's the best and everything. It's like, wait a minute. What is the default? What should be happening?
Disposed towards prayer. Like, I want to bring all of this stuff in together, and I don't want to destroy any of it.
Okay. Sorry. I know he would like to have Christopher West and St. Thomas Aquinas all together. All right. We're having a hard enough time just getting Alphonsus and Aquinas together, let alone the modernist weird stuff. That reminds me, I got to take a note about something I heard about Christopher West. Hold on a second. Okay, I grabbed that Christopher West story, and I'm going to save it for the very end of the video. Continue, Christian.
I want it all, and I want to understand a framework for understanding this. Build a framework rather for understanding this. In light of the reality of concupiscence and the effects of original sin.
Build a framework for understanding this. Okay, the framework that needs to be built, which is already built, which has been trashed, is the framework of nature regarding the conjugal act. So here's our friend, our shish kebab Telos, right? Okay, so what we have is first is procreation, and if you want to get to the secondary ends, which is remedy of concupiscence or pleasure, you have to go through procreation first. This is the framework. It gets a lot simpler if you just keep nature, keep the framework. If you want to get to the remedy of concupiscence or the pleasure, you have to go through procreation first. Whether there's fertility there at a particular time is not your deal, but you have to go here first. So if you're doing things so that when this is gone only, then you've got a different framework. You've got this nature. I only do this nature, and then I could do this nature sometimes. There's the problem. You've wrecked the framework. So what happens is everyone just kind of goes, whatever you want to do. If you're married, it's fine because it gets too complicated. So we just say whatever flies for you, that's cool. And you end up with, you got to wait till the end of this video. I'm going to tell you the story about what happens when you take this, as Timothy Gordon says, Christopher West fruitcake stuff to its logical conclusion. You might have a little demon. All right. Now I'll tempt you with that, but anyway, back. We'll put this down for a moment. Go, Christian.
The reality of the marital debt and the danger that comes with being in this world with original sin in relation to mortal sin in the sexual realm.
As you know, marital debt means one telos because you have a right to what you owe. What do you owe? The marital debt to what? Where's our framework? Procreation. This is so funny. You guys are probably laughing at me. Procreation. That's what you owe right there. Procreation. But if you don't owe procreation, then you owe a debt to something we can't define, known as unity. And when you pursue that unity, you may lose your mind and you may invite something else into your life that you didn't expect. You have to wait till the end. All right. Sorry.
Understand this in relation to the ascetical life. I want to understand this in relationship with the ends of grace and of perfection preached by our mystical theologians. So I think that it's a very, very complicated question. What
did he just say? It's a very complicated question. Christian Wagner, you are the smartest pants guy out here. So what's complicated about it? Well, what's complicated is when you take your framework, like we said, and you wreck it and you start having two frameworks. This is the framework one day, and that's the framework the other day. So you got two different ones. You got this or this. You got to keep the framework together. I'm going to maybe move these up. It'll be easier. All right. That's why it's confusing, Christian, because you got two different frameworks. You got a multi-level chessboard of sin, motivation, nature. What do you expect? There's the problem. if I didn't articulate that perfect, but I'm going to try in this video, okay? Sorry to ramble.
That can't really get reduced to the moral judgment of, is this venially sinful or not venially sinful?
It can't really get reduced. Well, we're going to have to, and we got to get. Let me get to some quotes from St. Alphonsus, okay?
There's all things are good, not all things are profitable, sort of idea that might be going on here, where even if we wanted to agree to disagree on the practical question of whether, these acts of venial sin, how often they happen, whether they happen, that's ultimately going to be a question of the practical order. But what I'm more interested in is actually looking at, the ends of the ascetical life and how that has played forth practically in the tradition of the church, which I think offers one of the sort of best expositions of the question.
Well, you're basically out of time. I wanted to bring you in for the locals.
All right, good enough. I think we got the idea. Look, listen, let's go to our notes. Hold on. Okay, so now for the meat of the show, where we get into a little Alphonsus to see how he differs from Aquinas, okay? As some of you, or maybe most of you know by now, the reason why I say Aquinas is sort of the gold standard and why it was so cool that Enoch did the little song about him, because he is the man. What are we talking about? Papal approval. No ecclesiastical writer has ever received more direct, positive, and formal approbation than accord with the Holy See, than more writings of the doctrine of the church. Of this doctrine of the church. Okay, so 4 popes basically said anything that professors of theology could safely teach, any opinion of St. Al, and confessors without weighing reasons could safely follow him, simply on the fact that St. Alphonsus said so. All right, that's a big deal. So this isn't like, well, that's just some. Hey, if St. Alphonsus said it, you got a problem if you're kind of like, nah, that's not quite right. You know what I mean? That's about all I can say on that. That's it. So this has all been kind of buried. Aquinas has been in English for a long time, and it's easy to kind of find it and go through it. But Alphonsus was buried, so there's not a lot there, and you got to sort of find it. Then you have to dissect it, and it just takes a while. I've been thinking about this for months, and then my friend Jerome up there from Quebec, with his French accent's like, hey, look at this. I think Alphonsus says something different than Aquinas. And I'm like, oh boy, how could that be possible? Okay, let's go to Book 6, the infamous Book 6 of Aquinas. I'm going to have all this in the show notes. You can have the Latin. You can have everything. All right, so don't worry if you can't see the little screen. All right, now, so he starts off a little benign. Moreover, the opinion pleases me. This is Alphonsus I'm quoting. That coitus with a pregnant woman cannot be excused from venial faults unless there is danger of incontinence or some honest cause, according to what is said in number 882. So he's like, look. It's venial fault during pregnancy, which is what I've been saying. He says, except for in danger of incontinence. I'm like, okay, well, hang on a minute. That's not what I've been saying, because that's not what Aquinas says, and that's not what other saints are saying. But they kind of do. Once you get Alphonsus in your brain, you can start to sort of kind of see it from another perspective, with all these older saints condemning this stuff as venial sin always. Hold on. All right? Let's go to the 882 dub, or whatever the heck that is, and see what he's actually saying. And I'm telling you, this is why it's a little confusing, but I spent some time trying to break this down, okay? So Christian Wagner, take some notes. Hopefully this is going to be helpful to you and everyone else. Okay, so 3 ends can be considered in marriage: intrinsic essential, substantial ends, intrinsic accidental ends, and extrinsic accidental and extrinsic accidental ends. So there's a mouthful of stuff that went in one ear and out the other of everyone, and no one even knew what I said. This is why I'm going to slow this down, and this is why it gets confusing. Let's keep it real simple. Marriage has 2 elements. Permanence is one, and exclusivity. Those are your 2 elements of marriage. It must be permanent and it must be exclusive. And it has one purpose: procreation. Those are the 3 goods. Very simple Augustinian goods. Keep that in your brain. Very simple, okay? two elements, exclusivity and permanence. One purpose, procreation. Okay? Remember that. Let's dive into what St. Al says. He says there's three ends that could be considered in marriage. Intrinsic, essential, which means that which you have to have. Okay, let's just keep going now. There are two intrinsic, essential ends. So intrinsic means it's it's in the marriage. It has to be. And they're essential. It means without it, you have no marriage. And that's what I call the elements. He says mutual delivery, which is right over the body, and obligation to repay the debt. Okay? And an indissoluble bond. So basically he's saying there's two intrinsic essential elements. And the reason I'm being slow and deliberate and writing this down is because with marriage, the problem is you start throwing out words like element, significance, bond, unity, and then dimension, okay? You start saying all this stuff and you got instant confusion and you can make marriage whatever you want. That's why we have Kermit sipping tea in the background saying, that's none of my business, but that's none of my business. And that's the way everyone is now. So no one can, it's like, don't ask, don't tell. People are like, wait a minute, we need some answers here. And because NFP has created extra problems with everything I'm reading here, it's like you can't get there. You can't figure it out when you put NFP in the mix. You can't figure it out. Therefore, anything goes. All right. Now, continuing, there are also two intrinsic accidental ends. That means lawful purposes to the procreation of children and a remedy for concupiscence. Correct. That is, Aquinas says that too. Yeah, of course he does. There are two lawful, it is lawful. Remedy of concupiscence is lawful. It's right there in the Bible, okay? So those are your two lawful purposes, but you have one primary telos, I said, and that's correct. So you can have two lawful purposes to the conjugal act, but you can either be pursuing procreation or you can be pursuing remedy of concupiscence. Those are your two things you can be pursuing. But if you're going to pursue, you have to go through one nature. And that you have to go through, this is why there's only one telos. You have to go through procreation if you're going to get remedy of concupiscence. This is the reason, boys and girls, why contraception is wrong, because you are bypassing your procreation to get to whatever you want to get to, the remedy or the pleasure. That's the reason it's wrong. It's not because it separates the essential, it separates the unitive and the procreative. That's not it. Okay, continuing. However, there can be many extrinsic secondary accidental ends, such as reconciling peace, capturing pleasure, etc. What did he just say? There can be many extrinsic secondary accidental ends. That's right. So how many other, so what he is talking about is this right here, the pleasure. We're not defining this. Go ahead and define what these things are. You want to do it's kind of there. You can't really put a number on. There might be 5,017 reasons why you're pursuing this pleasure. Okay. We're not going to tell you what they are or why they are, but no one can define them. There can be many. How many is many? Unlimited. There's no number of many. Secondary accidental ends. Okay, reconciling peace. Does that sound like total gift of self to you? Capturing pleasure. Does that sound like total gift of self to you? Yes, etc. Now, this is part of the problem with why I keep saying that what do you call it? The annulments are connected to the NFP, because look what it says right here in I think it's page 1337. I can't remember, from the new commentary on the Code of Canon Law. As marital obligations considered essential expanded in Vatican II, it is impossible to make a complete list of those essential obligations and rights. Because we have rights, we have obligations. You can't consent to what is not defined. Now, listen, this is why I'm saying that what is primary is essential and what is secondary is not. Because he is explaining, Alphonsus correctly is explaining, there can be many extrinsic, secondary, accidental ends. So this is secondary. They're extrinsic. They're not integral. They're not essential. They're not intrinsic to marriage. Okay, your heart and your lungs are intrinsic to your life, okay? But your car, your house are not. So you have to have heart and lungs if you want to keep going. But you don't have to have a car or a house if you want to keep going. It would be nice, but you don't have to have them. All right? So similarly, if we start saying a car and a house are required for life, you're going to have trouble. If you're going to start saying these accidental ends these secondary accidental ends are now essential, which is what you do when you say good to the spouses, you have made an impossible definition of marriage, which is exactly what we have today. And this is why consent to marriage with the new rules, with the new essence of marriage being good of the spouses, consent takes a lifetime to consummate. You don't consent at the wedding. You consent your whole life. That's why there's no more marital death. There's just marital consent. It's perpetual consent, and that consent is not done until you're dead. So this is why if there's a breakup before you're dead, there was no consent. That's why you can get the annulment. That's the weird part about this. And it was kind of called out in 1971 by Staffa at the Signatura, Cardinal Staffa, but everyone just ignored him. So this is why I keep going back to that. Object of consent is big. Once you start taking this object of consent, which is procreation, and you have made the object of consent the pleasure and the when you expand it to all of this, you can never consent to the whole world and beyond, to infinity. You can't consent to that. So therefore, it's only done when you're dead. When you stop breathing, your consent is done, and now we know the marriage was valid. Let me know in the comments if you want to talk more about that. That's all from Marshner from Christendom College. Okay, so that also I said I wrote down here, and it's true. In 1944, the Holy Office condemned making these primary. That was like one of the last best things that Pius XII did before he got weird on NFP. He said, look, you can't do this. You cannot make Christopher West Catholic. You can't say that good of the spouses, theology of the body, all that is Catholic. You can't say that because they're they're not intrinsic, they're extrinsic. All right. Now, continuing. So Alphonsus says, having said this, it is certain, number one, that if anyone were to contract positively excluding the intrinsic substantial ends of marriage, namely with the intention of not repaying the debt or contracting for a time, he would not only sin, but would also not enter into any marriage. So also common with St. Thomas. Yep, that's right. If you leave out something that's essential, you can't, you leave out kids, or you leave out permanence, or you leave out exclusivity. Nope, you did not consent to marriage. It is certain that if anyone were to exclude two intrinsic accidental ends, he could sometimes contract not only validly, but also licitly. What does that mean? For example, if you were old and married without hope of procreating children and did not intend for a remedy of concupiscence, aka Josephite marriage, okay? So you don't need to exercise your rights, and you don't, if you're not going, so you can, in other words, if you set up your Josephite marriage ahead of time, I am not going to consent to this right. So there it is. And it's so you can set up a Josephite marriage in the beginning if you want. So this is why there's only two elements. You have to say exclusive and you have to say permanent. But you can contract by excluding the procreation if you want to ahead of time. Now, there's that. For pleasure, so it's going to get meatier, you guys. Hold on a minute. And this is for the record. This is important. It's not easy. Like I said, you want to soundbite this? No, we've got to comb through it. Sorry. We're going to shoot. Hopefully it'll be not 3 hours. Hopefully not. Theology, okay. It is certain that it is lawful to have copulation for pleasure alone. It is certain that it is unlawful, pardon me, to have copulation for pleasure alone. All right, got that, everybody? Got that, Timothy Gordon? As is clear from Proposition 9, condemned by Innocent the 11th. And this is where I first heard this from Christian Wagner, actually. The work of marriage exercised for pleasure alone is entirely free from fault. And even from venial. Okay, fine. So if you're shooting for, if you're shooting for just this right there, just the pleasure, it's venial sin. You have to at least be shooting for a remedy of concupiscence. Let's continue though. Yet it is common among all that this is not mortal, but only venial sin. And the reason why is it is not mortal sin that the delight in some object can be mortal from two reasons, two sources, either because the object itself is gravely forbidden or because a man delights in it and his last end. But this pleasure, neither of these occurs, not the first clearly, nor the second as it is assumed here. Anyway, it's venial sin. If you want to get into the weeds on this more, we can, but I got to keep going. It is not excused from venial sin, however, because there is a certain perversion of order. Since the delight which is intended by nature as a means to generation becomes the end of having copulation. Okay, listen up, though. But there will be no sin if the spouse principally intends the procreation of offspring and uses pleasure moderately, intending it to stir himself to copulation, just as likewise he sins not at all, who intends moderate pleasure in eating in order to provide suitable generation for the body. So there we go. It's very simple, very simple. As long as you have your structure in place, Timothy or Christian Wagner, you're cool. You can pursue pleasure as long as you're going through procreation first. You don't have to practice pro-procreation NFP or anything. You just have to not be trying to play hide the egg and trying to get rid of this. We only do this on certain days of the month because we know this isn't in the neighborhood. No, you don't get to do that. That you're cheating. God's not a chump. Okay, so let's keep going. And I'm gonna, because if I sit here and perseverate on every single one of these, it's going to take 5 hours. So anything I say you want to ask a question about, go ahead. It is asked, thirdly, does one sin venially who marries principally for the remedy of concupiscence? Great question. I thought we had to marry for procreation because Tobit 8:7 says, all of Sarah's husbands, Tobit, was it Sarah? Yeah, I guess. All her husbands died because they weren't interested in procreation. They were interested in something else, right? So they all died. In other words, yeah, don't do that. You want to be interested in procreation. That's the best. That's the top of the heap. So what's going on? The first opinion affirms, and this is held by St. Thomas. They prove that from this and from the authority of many holy fathers. This is why I think this is, do you sin venially who marries principally for the sin of remedy of concupiscence? They also prove it by reason because although remedy of concupiscence is also an honest end of marriage, which we showed earlier, it's honest, it's an end. Like he said, it's one of the two, how did he put it? It's the remedy of concupiscence is one of the two intrinsic accidental ends, lawful purposes. Procreation and remedy of concupiscence. Those are two lawful pursuits. As long as they are happening in the framework of nature, which is this. You cannot mess with this. You have to be shooting for procreation. You have to allow, it's not just being open to life. You have to not manipulate this so that you only get near this nature when this is not in the room. Oh, it's no procreation time, so let's go. No, you don't get to do that. You let God handle that stuff. Don't touch. It's like touching the Ark of the Covenant. Don't do that. That's what Onan did. Don't do that. All right, keep going. Where were we? They prove this from the authority of many. They also prove it by reason, because although remedy of concupiscence is an honest end of marriage, the primary end is procreation of offspring. Therefore, it is against the order of reason for the secondary end to be chosen before the primary. Okay? Correct. It is against the order of reason for the secondary end to be chosen before the primary. So, if you're going to be shooting for this secondary end, you can do it as long as you go through this to get it. As long as you're not touching this, messing with this, you can go to this. As long as you go through this first. So I don't have to, this is what, and we're going to get to Aquinas in a minute, but when you read Aquinas, he makes it kind of sound like you have to have in your brain that you want this. And that is what Tobit wanted, and that's good, and that's the best. But apparently, Alphonsus is going, wait a minute, it doesn't have to be going on in your head here that you want this, as long as you don't mess with this when you're doing the act. Okay, so Clement of Alexandria, he happens to say, this is one of the fathers they're talking about, because of its divine institution for the propagation of man, the seed is not to be vainly ejaculated, other than to procreate children is to do. Okay, so if you're doing it other than to procreate children is to do injury to nature. All right, that's true. Nature is this structure. Nature is not what's going on with your synapses in here. That's okay. That's like thoughts and stuff. This is the nature. So if you, as long as you can be lawfully pursuing remedy of concupiscence, as long as you are not doing it in vain, meaning planning, you're only planning because you're trying to avoid, just like Onan was avoiding, he was keeping seed from egg. If you're just going to keep the seed from the egg, and everything's cool for about 5 days or 20 days or whatever, and then we're okay, whoa, not cool anymore, nature's back, whoa, no. Obviously, also, when nature calls, this is what's up, and when nature is not calling, this is what's up. So God has a way of kind of like, look, stupid, it's the NFP, stupid, so don't do that. If that wasn't clear. Anyway, let the educator be ashamed of the unseemly conduct of those who have intercourse without intending children. Yeah, that's right. It's called the sin, of the act. It's the art of the subtle art of sinning subtly. How to go in Casti 108, the art of subtle sinning, whatever, because you're like, look, no, everything's supernatural, dog. We're just doing NFP. It's just like totally natural. It's like, no. Unseemly conduct of those who have intercourse without intending children. What that has to mean, if St. Alphonsus is right, you don't have to always be thinking in your head, because we're talking nature here, okay? You can, as long as you keep the physical nature unmolested with your calendar schedule based on trying to beat the system, beat the odds, because you don't want the baby. Then what are you doing? What do you want? Oh, I want this, but I don't want this. It all goes together, and you can't mess with it. You mess with this, you're messing with God. Not a good look. Don't do that. How are we going to outperform? How are we going to outpopulate all these Muslims? How? They're going to make the life hard. Then you're going to have a grave reason right there. Get out all this grave reason stuff. It violates this. This doesn't care about grave reason at all. You do this or you don't do this. Grave reason has nothing to do with it. Now let's talk a little Aquinas here. Okay, He says, consequently, there are only two. This is where I was getting my information because Aquinas is much more readily available. Consequently, there are only two ways in which married persons can come together without any sin at all, namely in order to have offspring and in order to pay the debt. Otherwise, it is always at least a venial sin. All right, so he's saying you need to be trying to have kids, or you're honoring the debt, because it says required on the part of the agent, the person who's initiating, the intention of the due end, and thus the offspring is accounted a good of matrimony. So I'm reading that, and I'm like, hey, you have to have it in your brain too. You have to have the intention of the due end. And then he goes on to say that, at least has to be habitual, whatever. So I wrote a little note to myself. Planning to avoid the due end violates the intention for it. That's right. So what we're getting at when we integrate Alphonsus into Aquinas, remember that hermeneutic of Alphonsus, Aquinas continuity we're shooting for? When you integrate them, you don't have to have the intention between your ears necessarily. It's good if you do, but if you don't have the pro-life, pro-baby intention between your ears during the act or before the act, it's okay. As long as you don't mess with the nature. As long as you don't plan to bypass the nature. Well, we're just going to do the nature when this ain't happening. We're going to totally do the nature and then we're going to call it natural. But when nature shows up, we're not going to, oh no, we're not doing, no. You're just contracepting. That's all you're doing. And you're just fooling. You're not fooling anybody. You're not fooling, but you're fooling all the Catholics because they're all so into it. And then, like I've said before, once you start jamming with the horse and mule, you lose understanding, and the devil hath power. I'm teasing you. At the end, we're going to talk about how the devil hath power. In a way. Augustine, what does Augustine say? For necessary sexual intercourse for begetting is free from blame, and itself is alone worthy of marriage. Okay. For begetting is free from blame. Look, so he's kind of like, look, if you're reading Augustine, if you're not trying to have kids, you stink. You're sinning. Isn't that what it says right there? If we read it in light of, and I hate it when modernists do it. Let's read Aquinas in light of Vatican II and Telos. No, because they're like mutually exclusive, pretty much. But it's free from blame if you're trying to get pregnant. Let's see, intercourse for begetting is free from blame. All right. So what that means is you have to have all the nature intact, okay? And you're not messing with it. No, it no longer follows reason but lust. So he's saying there's two things. You either have lust or you have procreation. None of this. So you can't even go for that. This is kind of one way to look at it if you read this a little too seriously. So Alphonsus is going, no, you can shoot for this or you can shoot for this, as long as the nature is intact. But you can't just shoot for that. Hold on, maybe you can. I'm going to keep going with this. This is like I said, this gets a little confusing, and NFP absolutely totally makes it work, totally wrecks it. So just bear with me. Okay, and yet it pertains to the character of marriage not to exact this, but to yield it to the partner, lest by fornication the other sin damnably. Okay. So hang on a sec. Let me digest this for a minute. Okay, thinking out loud here, and I guess I'm right. Let's see what I'm saying. Okay, but it pertains to the character of marriage not to exact this. So in other words, you don't have to say we have to have a kid when this is happening. We need to get pregnant or this won't work. Not to exact this, but to yield it to the partner. So it's right over the body. It's not right over the body. So you're going to get pregnant this time. Lest by fornication the other sin damnably. So it's a remedy of concupiscence. That's also fine to pursue. That's what he's saying, I think. It's like, yeah, keep your structure in place, but If somebody just wants to go for the remedy of concupiscence, they can. That's kind of what he's saying. But if both are set under such lust, they do what is plainly not the matter of marriage. So if they're both after just this, okay, that's not the matter of marriage. That's not, this is just pursuing this is not cool if this is all you're after. However, it is their intercourse they love, which is what is honest and more than what is dishonest. Okay, listen, this is kind of important. However, if in their intercourse they love what is honest more than what is dishonest, that is, what is matter of marriage more than what is not matter of marriage, then it is allowed to them on the authority of the apostle as a matter of pardon, 1 Corinthians 7:6. In other words, venial sin is on the remedy of concupiscence lust continuum. Let me tell you what I just said. If you're pursuing this only, that's venial sin. But if the people love what is honest more than what is dishonest, then it is allowed to them as a matter of pardon. So this is the number one. If you really want to be super holy, you're trying to get pregnant every time, and you just want that baby because that's what God wants. And that's where the super holiness is, right there. You're allowed to pursue this. So this is why this is venial sin territory, and it's kind of on a continuum. If you're trying to pursue the pleasure and you don't care about remedy of concupiscence, you don't care about babies, the only thing on your mind is this, 100%, not 99, 100%. That's a venial sin. But if you have more than 50% on something honest, like procreation, like, yeah, you're kind of thinking about a baby pretty much, or yeah, you're thinking about remedy of concupiscence, and yeah, the pleasure is kind of a side issue, that's cool. All right. That's what they're saying is okay. So this venial sin stuff is on you. That's your conscience. It's all about your, this is why we got Kermit the Frog back here saying, but that's none of my business, because he can't really go there. Okay. So now when you have NFP is when you start getting rid of this, nothing is anyone's business, and no one can judge your NFP or your purpose or nothing. But when we have this structure versus two different structures, you got this on one day and you got this on another day. No, when you have one, now we can at least talk about it. Okay. So you got to be you can't have in your mind more than 50% pleasure. That's what he's saying. What is honest more than what is dishonest? So these goals are honest. This is best. This is the second best, but it's still lawful. And this comes with the territory, but it can't be the main thing. If it is, that's venial sin. If that's what you're about, that's venial sin. The reason why this is because once you start pursuing pleasure and you're messing with this stuff, it's gonna take on a life of its own. And that's what happens with the horse and the mule. They start getting into that pleasure, and it's the homos too. You start putting the flesh above. Watch out. You are now creating something you can't control, and you're going to be in trouble. That is what, okay, we already talked about that. Now, here's a little more Aquinas. On the contrary, wherever there is indulgence, there must needs be some reason for excuse. So indulgence is 1 Corinthians 7:6. I say this by way of indulgence, meaning be careful, you might burn. So you separate for a time, but you don't want the devil to tempt you. So if you need a remedy of concupiscence, okay? Now, marriage is allowed in the state of infirmity by indulgence, 1 Corinthians 7:6. Therefore, it needs to be excused by certain goods. That's right. That's why I was talking about last time where Father Mike Schmidt says, hey, if you're in a state of grace, the more conjugal acts, the holier you get. No, it must be excused by procreation. But he's kind of right. If you have NFP, all you need is this. Doesn't matter. It's all conjugal act makes you holy, because we don't need to excuse it by certain goods. So we just do whatever. No. NFP wrecks things. NFP causes you to sin because you basically end up pursuing this, man. That's what it is. Okay. It needs to be excused by certain goods. Let's keep going because we're going to try to we're going to take Aquinas and Alphonsus and put them together as best we can. Not easy. Reply to objection 2. This is more Aquinas. If a man intends by the marriage act to prevent fornication in his wife, it is no sin. So, if here's the husband and the wife says, "Hey, I want the remedy of concupiscence." Okay, you have a right to that. No sin, no problem. Because this kind of payment of the debt that comes under the good of faith. Faith is exclusivity. Faithful, right? That's what faithfulness means. Exclusivity. They have the right. But if he intends to avoid fornication in himself, then there is a certain superfluity, and accordingly there is venial sin. Nor was the sacrament instituted for that purpose, except by indulgence, which regards venial sin. So when you read this, you're like, dude, if I'm married and I'm like, I don't really want to have kids, but I sure got a remedy of concupiscence problem, man. You know what I mean? Okay. People write songs about it. Black Flag wrote a song about it. Sorry. Anyway, so if you are, this is where we're going to try. Okay, we're going to try to bend Aquinas a little bit. We're going to try to get this. We're going to make it fit as they said in Cinderella when they were passing the glass slip around after the party. Look, if he intends to avoid fornication in himself, there is a certain superfluity. We can't define that for sure. We can't know what level of superfluity you have. Superfluity. And accordingly, there is a venial sin. Nor is the sacrament instituted for that purpose, except by indulgence, which regards venial sins. So the sacrament was instituted for this purpose. So if you're shooting for this purpose, he's saying it's venial sin. It's like what he is saying, dude. All right. So what do we do with that? Because Alphonsus is saying no. I'm going to think about it. I'm going to push pause and think. Hold on. Okay, so I guess it's a glass half empty or half full. You know what I mean? So there is a certain superfluity, which is you can't put a number on that. It's like you're over the property line or you're not. All right. So that means accordingly there is venial sin. So if you need to exercise your right to remedy of concupiscence, but I guess you just go a little bit too much into the pleasure part, that's the venial sin. So we're trying to put a St. Alphonsus spin or interpretation on what Aquinas is saying, which is basically if you're not trying to get pregnant, it's venial sin. It's kind of what he says, black and white. But we know Alphonsus is the man. And also, it kind of makes sense too. The more when you start reading, this stuff starts to kind of fall in line a little bit. I was talking to my son, and I was like, "Yeah, I'm reading that Aquinas is basically saying after menopause, it's venial sin every time." And my son's like, "That's your wife. That doesn't make it doesn't sound right. Something's not sitting right." And so I would admit it is kind of a tough sell to try to put that together. And so Alphonsus does tend to help. Because he's like, and also I'm going to, at the end of the video, after we talk about this Christopher West demon stuff, it also helps with Casti Connubii 59. St. Alphonsus does. Continuing. Okay, now this is Cornelius a Lapide, and also this also helps. Alphonsus does when we read Cornelius a Lapide. Great biblical commentary. He's the man. He's totally cool. All right, let's see what he says. Permit the act of copulation by way of indulgence. I do not prescribe it. Nay, St. Augustine says, I say this by way of pardon. So there's look, the reason is not, you're not supposed to be shooting for the reason is procreation. That's the reason. There it is. But you can do this if you want to, if you need to. But this is the reason, okay? All right. The Greek word denotes forgiveness. Hence, St. Augustine gathers that is a venial sin to have sexual connection, not for the sake of children, but for carnal pleasure. Okay. and to avoid the temptations of Satan. All right, so look, what did I just read? It's a venial sin if you're shooting for pleasure or if you're shooting to avoid the temptations of Satan. That's venial sin. Wow. So I'm trying to avoid the temptations of Satan, and that's a venial sin. Okay, hold on a minute. You know, how it says it right there in the Bible. You can do this. So lest you be tempted by Satan, go commit a venial sin. All right, so that doesn't make sense, right? That's what Alphonsus kind of is saying when we get to his quote. To avoid the temptation, for pardon is given to what is sinful. So too indulgence is given to what concerns sin. Hold on. Or at all events, a lesser good, as St. Thomas Aquinas has rightly observed. Okay, so now we're helping St. Thomas Aquinas here fit with Alphonsus, because listen to this. So indulgence is given to what concerns sin, or at all events, a lesser good. So you can indulge in this, or you can indulge in this. When you indulge in this pleasure, it's venial sin. When you indulge in this, it's not. So the idea is don't overdo it. Okay? Don't be cruising on the pleasure too much. This whole act, you got to be careful with it. It's for procreation. People like doing it. And what happens is they just turn the whole thing upside down. And they're like, hey, this is what it's about, and we're open to life. That's like devil. No, you're not open to life. You have to go through life first. So it's not, this is life-giving love. All right. Here we might get some life out of it, but we're pursuing the quote love, which is basically just the body. We're just pursuing. No, it's life-giving. It's a love-giving contract, life-giving contract. So you've got to pursue this first, and love may come from your contract. Okay, so, or at all events, a lesser good. So you can shoot for the lesser good. Okay, so it's you can indulge in this, or you can indulge in this. This is a sin. This is not a sin, as St. Thomas has rightly observed. So maybe I was reading St. Thomas wrong, or a little too literally, or whatever. Again, also one thing that Christian Wagner said in his talk, he says, hey, I've said a lot of stuff in some of my old videos, and he's kind of like not real proud of it. It's like sometimes it's not easy to get all this stuff straight. But I was reading Aquinas, and now, like I said, we're bringing a little Alphonsus into the picture and trying to make some stuff a little bit straighter, a little more Catholic, and he's making some good arguments. I also want to say, and I've said this before, we cannot treat marriage as on a continuum of understanding, and marriage is, flowing and adapting and evolving. Marriage is nature. This structure is immutable. Doesn't matter what anybody says. Doesn't matter what Aquinas says. Doesn't matter what Alphonsus says. Nothing changes the structure, the principal order of nature. So we can explain it better or worse, but you can't change it. And that's the point of marriage. We don't have a view, my view, this view, we evolved. No. It is what it is. If it's in the Bible, that's it. It sounds obvious, right? It's not. Nowadays, it's just because, as we talked about earlier, now that we're treating the secondary ends, where was it? Up here, the secondary ends. Remember, once we started saying extrinsic secondary accidental ends, such as reconciling peace, good of the spouses. Once you start making those as essential, the marital obligations considered essential expanded, it is impossible to make a complete list of them. All right? You've just created a gigantic problem. So since you can't define marriage, now marriage is fluid, and we defined it one way back 800 years ago. Now we define it a little differently now. No. But once you start saying this can change, like Vatican II says this can change because this is not a contract of nature. Now it's a contract of love. It's no longer an office of just nature. It's an office of love with a little nature on top. So there's our contract, but now it's like this. Okay? Let's go back to where we were. See if I can find it. All right, a lapide. Yes. Now, here's some Alphonsus. The second opinion, however, is no less common and no less probable. Okay, they were getting into some meaty parts here, okay? From this is where Alphonsus kind of parts ways with Aquinas. It says, like, hang on a minute, because I'm reading Aquinas just like John Farrell used to and say that it's all venial sin everywhere. During pregnancy is at least venial sin, and during menopause is venial sin, because you can't pursue what is primary. Not possible. So it's venial sin. And you're like, wow, that's a lot of venial. That's a tough sell. So Alphonsus is like, wait a minute. Hang on. Let's listen to what he says. The second opinion, however, an alternative to Aquinas, however, is no less common. So there's a lot of people thinking along these lines, and no less probable. So he's like, hey, it could happen. Being open-minded about this, you guys. Denies that one sins in any way, provided that one contracting does not exclude the end of procreating offspring. Like I was saying, nature doesn't care what your thoughts are, doesn't care what you're thinking. Makes no difference if you're using the contraceptive pill, what's going on between your ears. No difference at all to the way the nature works. And NFP makes no difference. Contraceptive mentality is retarded. It's stupid. That's an excuse. The nature is the only thing that matters. The effectiveness of NFP has nothing to do with how you feel or what you think about. It has to do with nuts and bolts of calendar and symptoms and science and the harnessing and the manipulating of science of the body to get what you want. So you're just doing the act when this thing is not around. Woo! Anytime it comes around, oh nope. We're restricting. We're using artificial restrictions, even though nature calls when everything's lined up. Nope, it's out. Okay. All right. And what they say of those contracting, they assert the same of the spouses who have copulation principally in order to calm concupiscence. I talk too much. I don't even know what I'm saying. Just a minute. That sins in any way, provided that one contracting does not exclude the end of procreating offspring. And what they say of those contracting, they assert the same of spouses who have copulation principally in order to calm concupiscence. So you can get married. You can get married for that reason, because you don't want to burn. And that's it. Dude, it's all about calming concupiscence. And that's why you can do it. You can get married for a lot of reasons, as long as you don't redefine marriage. You can get married for the money. You can get married for the house. Whatever. As long as you aren't changing stuff around. As long as you're not going like this and calling it marriage. You can get married for any reason, as long as the things you're pursuing are lawful. Okay. The reason for this opinion is that marriage was instituted by God not only for procreating offspring, but also as a remedy for concupiscence. Yes. As is proved from the apostle, 1 Corinthians 7:2, where he says, this is where Paul says, because of fornication, let each man have his own wife, and each woman have her own husband. That's right. As I said, I think what was going on before was people were looking at Aquinas and taking it a little too literally and not kind of figuring out that it's legitimate to not be pursuing procreation. But what does that mean? That means in your mind, but not necessarily. It means as long as you have the physical action, the nature intact, okay? And he does say you have habitually minded to be having kids. So at least in your head, he does say that Aquinas, and I think rightly, it sounds like it makes sense. It's like you got to kind of, at least as a matter of habit or a matter of structure, or it's like, yes, this is for babies. Otherwise, you lock in on, no, this is not for babies, and that's not good. To this text, St. Thomas responds, saying thus, if someone by the act of marriage intends to avoid fornication in the spouse, this is not any sin. All right, come on here, Susie. This is not any sin. But because this is a certain rendering of the debt. Okay, because this is a certain... All right. Hang on, my son's calling. Just a second. Okay, so where was I? This reason, the opinion that marriage was instituted by God. Okay, yeah. To this text, St. Thomas responds, thus saying, if someone by the act of marriage intends to avoid fornication, okay, yeah, I already read this. But if he intends to avoid fornication in himself, there is a certain excess. And according to this, it is venial sin. Nor was marriage instituted for this except according to indulgence, which concerns venial sins. This is what I just read. We said it in another way earlier, but that's what it is. So, there is a certain excess, and according to this, it is venial sin. So the certain excess is venial sin. Because if you're pursuing remedy of concupiscence and you have even a little teeny bit of pleasure that you like, he's saying that, dude, this is like, you got a venial sin here. So that's what he's saying. Aquinas is basically saying it isn't even 50%. If you're pursuing remedy of concupiscence, you're going to get a little pleasure out of the thing. So it's venial sin to even pursue remedy of concupiscence because you're getting a little pleasure. That's why all these people have said in the past, Catholics think that any pleasure is bad. And this is where that stuff comes from. They're reading, I guess, Aquinas a little too strict, or maybe he wasn't super clear on what he was doing, or so. It's kind of crazy. So Alphonsus is coming to the rescue on this because he's going, look, there is a certain excess, and according it's venial sin. So your certain excess when you're trying to pursue remedy of concupiscence is there's some pleasure involved. And that's venial sin, that pleasure. Doesn't make sense. It just doesn't make sense. So this is why Lapide was saying, to the degree that it's more about pleasure and less about remedy of concupiscence, that's the venial sin. Point is that the conjugal act is serious stuff. It's not just the more the better. It's like this. It's like all you pursue is love. Just give me the love and all. No. You got to pursue nature first, in order. Okay, now to the point of this video where Alphonsus says, time out, Aquinas, I'm Alphonsus, and I'm going to say something different. But with due respect to so great a doctor whose opinions I have endeavored to follow everywhere else, except here, the interpretation of St. John Chrysostom seems more proper. Wow. What is it? Tell us what's going on here, St. Alphonsus, because you respect Aquinas, but you're saying, wait a minute, you're going to part ways a little bit? Wait a minute. Oh, how are we? This is the angelic doctor that Jesus appeared to and said, well done. These are good words. You've spoken well of me. Hold on. Okay, hang on. Whose words I will cite. Oh, and by the way, people have kind of criticized Alphonsus for being like liberal or lenient. And I think this is where it comes from. All right. I think it was part of it. So he just cited whose words I will cite, namely that because of fornication is not understood as avoiding fornication in the spouse, but in oneself. That's true. Okay. But Aquinas has got it. He's just, I don't know, man. He's super strict on it. And this seems clear from the context of the same apostle, where it is said, Paul says in the Bible, it is good for a man not to touch a woman, but because of fornication, let each man have his own wife, and each woman her own husband. Okay, so it's not like, so that you get to do this. In other words, it's not just you get to keep the other person from doing it. You get to do it. See how the apostle gives men counsel to abstain from touching women? Yeah, it's better to not. So all this conjugal activity is cool, and God wants more. The best is celibacy. That's best. But if you can't, it's not that if you can't control yourself, if you are deciding not to, if you're making the decision to not be celibate, do marriage. But if they themselves, this is why there's no duty to procreate, because procreation is not the best. Celibacy is the best. There's no duty to procreate. Not anymore. Not in the New Testament. And there's already enough people. There was enough after that happened. So anyway, enough about that. I've already covered that in other videos. See how the apostle gives men counsel from touching women, but they themselves are in danger of incontinence, so that they do not fall into fornication, unless he only permits the remedy. But he not only permits the remedy, but urges it, saying, let each have his own wife. And although he adds, but I say this in according to indulgence, not according to command. He says this for those who are not incontinent, to whom he merely permits marriage, while he advises abstaining from marriage when he says, but I say to the unmarried and widows, it is not good for them to remain as I am. But I say to the unmarried and widows, it is not good for them to remain as I. So look, dude, like most people, get married. That's the point. Don't try to be celibate if you're not supposed to be, if that's not your gig, right? Nor does indulgence here mean permission of venial fault. Kind of makes sense. I was kind of looking, I'm like, yeah, okay, so yeah. I was just trying to read the Aquinas, and it said, first, it's by way of indulgence, and that means sin. Alphonsus is like, wait, this is not what it really means. So he's helping us, as I've said 20 times already. Nor does indulgence here mean permission of venial fault. To indulge is not to grant leave to sin lightly, but to allow what is lawful. The best, what God wants, is for you to pursue procreation. The ultimate was, the Holy Family. They didn't even, there was Joseph, before, hello, Christopher West, back when they were naked without shame, Adam and Eve had no conjugal acts. They're before the fall. That was this whole conjugal activity thing wasn't even supposed to happen. It happened with a thought. But then original sin, so it has to happen with this. So you have to be careful with it because you're generating original sin with this stuff, okay? So the best is not to pursue the body, not the ways of the flesh, but the ways of the spirit. So all this stuff is dangerous stuff. But now we have it like this. Hello, Gregory Popchak. Hello, Christopher West. Woohoo! Strap your rocket ship to the sky, bro. No. Dangerous stuff. God puts remedy of concupiscence to help us. He puts pleasure because otherwise there won't be any babies, all right? But got to keep it structured. So, and it is lawful to be pursuing remedy of concupiscence. But when St. Paul turns his speech to those who are in danger of incontinence, he not only permits, but also absolutely urges them to marry, saying in verse 9, but if they do not contain themselves, it is better, let them marry, for it is better to marry than to burn. For let them marry truly expresses exhortation rather than mere permission. So he's saying, look, if you need to get married, if you decided, if you can't contain yourself, that is Protestant. If you do not contain yourself, if you decide to not be a priest or a nun, if you decide to get married, then do that. Okay, it's better to marry than to burn, which means remedy of concupiscence. For let them marry, let them pursue remedy of concupiscence. It's not the best, but it's legal. It's okay. This is well confirmed by what the apostle says in the same place, 1 Corinthians 7:5, where speaking of spouses, he writes, do not deprive one another, except perhaps by agreement for a time, that you may give yourselves to prayer and return again to one another, lest Satan tempt you because of your incontinence. Therefore, if spouses are allowed to ask for the debt solely to avoid incontinence, they are also allowed to enter marriage for the same end. Yeah. So you can enter marriage you're going to welcome children and everything. This is why this open to life stuff is tricky. Yes, Catholic is open to life. Yes, you should be open to life as long as you don't mess with the nature. But you can't be now if we just say I'm open to life, dude, I'm open to life, it could happen. No, you have to be pursuing life with nature, but you don't have to be pursuing it with your head. See how confusing this gets? This is why you have to have this thing in place if you're going to even talk about this stuff. Once you start getting nature, removing the nature from it, I'm even confusing myself. Let me stop talking so much. Hang on. Okay. Therefore, if spouses are allowed to ask for the debt solely to avoid incontinence, they are also allowed to enter marriage for the same end. Yeah. Okay. If you're allowed to ask for the debt solely for incontinence, then it's legitimate. That's a reason that, but you don't even have to pursue procreation ever. You can just not mess with it. Don't mess with it. Don't use any family planning. Don't plan jack. Stop using science and technology to get your outcome that you want. Don't touch the Ark of the Covenant. Don't touch nature. If you want to just pursue remedy of concupiscence your whole life, there you go. You're welcome to your Joe six-pack Catholic. Okay? Fight for your right to party. Whatever. That's it. If you're Operation Sainthood Tobit, you're going to go for procreation alone. It's up to you. That's cool. That's good. Okay? That's super holy. You don't have to. But if you're pursuing only this, it's venial sin. So get a grip, they're kind of saying, all right? That's Alphonsus. Moving on. Hence, St. John Chrysostom explained that the Apostles' text says that one of the reasons why God instituted marriage is that incontinence be avoided. Yep. These are his words. What then was the cause of marriage? And why was it given by God? Here Paul saying to avoid fornication. Let each have his own wife. Let me avoid fornication. May we restrain concupiscence. Being content with our own wife, marriage brings this to us. This is its fruit. This is its gain. For marriage is sought that it may help us to live chastely. Thus the doctor. To the authorities of the Holy Father that are opposed. The author of, I haven't looked this up. I don't know what petrocorium is. I don't know. I forgot. Replies to the fathers that the fathers condemn spouses because they suppose them to be following the impulse of lust, not lawful remedy of concupiscence. All right, so what he's saying is the holy fathers that are opposed to what Alphonsus is saying is that the fathers condemn spouses because they suppose them to be following the impulse of lust. So look, he's saying, look, all you Aquinas and all you super, super old guys from way back, if you're not pursuing procreation, you're pursuing lust. That's what they're saying. You got procreation or you got lust. And that's what I've said before. And that makes sense. But that's if you're removing, I guess you're removing, you're using a method. You're trying to remove the procreation part of it. You're either keeping this together and you're just doing nature together, or you're getting rid of this and you're using some sort of method. So you're pursuing lust. So you've got to pursue procreation in your nature, but you don't have to pursue it by motive. You can, if you're reading these guys correctly, which Alphonsus is helping us do, you can be pursuing the remedy of concupiscence. To the reason of the contrary opinion, namely that it is disorder to choose a secondary end. This is interesting, I think. Listen to this. Okay, so the reason of the contrary opinion, namely that it is disorder to choose a secondary end before the primary, it is answered that there would indeed be disorder if the primary end were ordered to the secondary. That's like life-giving love, as Scott Hahn would say. But not if, among two lawful ends, the secondary is chosen before the primary. What did I just say? Let's figure that one out. Okay. There would indeed be disorder if the primary end were ordered to the secondary, life-giving love. Okay, so if we ordered with nature, the primary ordered to the secondary, life-giving love. If we did this, if we're shooting for the love, baby. All this love, see this? All these undefined ends of bonding, whatever bonding means, it's all in here somewhere. But this is infinite. You can't define bonding. It's the entire universe to infinity and beyond. There's your bonding. If we're this is disorder. If we're pursuing this, and then the life is secondary. That's disorder. But not if among two lawful ends the secondary end is chosen. So it's not ordered, but chosen. All right. What did he just say? He says, as long as your structure, your edifice, your nature is in place, and you choose this, that's lawful. You don't have to choose this. In fact, you could never talk about babies. You could not, as long it would be holier if you did, but you can just choose remedy of and accept. So you can be as open to life as you want, as long as you don't mess with nature. But once you start saying, oh, I'm open to life, but what you're doing is you're changing nature because you're only waiting till this doesn't exist. It might get a little life here, a little teeny bit there, a little bit on Tuesday, a little bit of life, a little bit of fertility, tiny bit. No, don't do that. So my point is, what he said was, don't change the order, but if you choose, you can choose what's legitimate, but you cannot reorder it. There's a soundbite for you right there. However, these intrinsic accidental ends, either procreation of offspring or avoidance of incontinence, in order to be honest, must be referred to God, if not actually, at least virtually or habitually. In other words, you gotta not use a method to plan sterility, which is what I said before. So, in order to be honest, must be referred to God. What does that mean? Keep nature intact. Referred to God. His plan, his nature, his blessing, increase and multiply. That is a structure of nature. If you're going to be honest with your conjugal act, you can choose to have a baby, or you can choose to remedy your concupiscence with a little pleasure in there, but you can't do it without the structure. If not actually, then at least virtually or habitually. So if you're not trying to pursue baby, at least you got to kind of, you can't have, they say to be honest, you got to at least have in your mind, you understand babies come from this, and that's, you got that. So they want you to, consider, or in order to refer us to God, you understand that the babies come from God. I guess that's all I can think of. It's splitting hairs at this point, I suppose, but the overall thing is there ain't no way that Alphonsus says NFP is okay. No way. He just says that basically what he's saying is it's not a sin to pursue remedy of concupiscence, and you don't have to be thinking it in your mind. But both of them are saying that you at least have to be in your mind on some level that procreation is of God, and that's what this stuff is about. Marriage without intention to procreate. Well, there's a juicy topic right there. On the edge of your seat yet? Here we go. This is all Alphonsus, all quotes from Alphonsus, made from AI into English. A marriage is contracted validly, but illicitly, when it is entered into with the intention of denying the conjugal debt. Okay? Nowadays, that's important because there is no debt. There's just a debt to consent. It's perpetual consent. You have to consent to your debt. There is no more debt. You have no right to anything except the right to ask for consent again. It's those. Don't get me started. Okay, a marriage is contracted validly, not illicitly, when it is entered into with the intention of denying the conjugal debt, avoiding offspring, or even of not raising the children of committing adultery, unless, however, such an intention is reduced to a pact, that is, unless it is added as a condition obliging something contrary to the essence of marriage, aka Josephite marriage. So yeah, it's valid, but illicit when it is entered, unless it's you guys. What did I just read? A marriage is contracted validly but illicitly when it is entered into with the intention of denying the conjugal debt and avoiding offspring, or not even raising the children committing adultery, unless, however, such intention is induced. Okay. So I don't think this matters much one way or the other. If you want to try to unpack that, I can't really figure it out. But Josephite marriage is fine, is the point. And I guess if you can enter into marriage, it's valid but illicit if your intentions are wrong, but you say the words. Hence, he contracts invalidly who wishes the marriage bond to last only for a year, or to reserve himself the power of committing adultery, or of not rendering the conjugal debt to the spouse who legitimately demands it. Yeah, that's right. You contract invalidly if you don't say the words. If you don't say what the contract is. This is why it's very important to stop saying covenant, because covenant just means there's no contract because you didn't consent. That's why they call it a marriage covenant today in the Catholic Church, or the Catholics call it a covenant, because there's no object of consent. All you're doing at the wedding is saying, I'm going to perpetually consent. I'm going to ask for consent every hour on the hour until we're dead. The wedding doesn't end until death. The wedding starts at the wedding and it ends at death. The actual ceremony. Because consent happens the entire life. Because the object is the entire life. Hence, he who contracts invalidly wishes the marriage bond to last only for a year, reserves himself the power of committing it. Okay. Rather, to be invalid, it must be something to the effect of, okay, yeah, this is what I wrote. This is a piece that has been scrapped from the internet, but it was a canon lawyer who wrote it, and he's correct. He talks about, it's called error of... the will determines the error, or the error determines the will. So the point is if you say the vows, they're binding, and it doesn't matter what you're thinking when you say them. The marriage is valid if you say the words. So here's a quote from this article, and I put the link from the Wayback Machine so you can still get it. Rather, to be invalid, it must be something to the effect of, I, Tarzan, marry you, Jane, in a dissoluble union. As another example, a general belief that marriage is not exclusive does not invalidate consent, but rather it must be to the effect of, so if you believe that marriage is not exclusive, you're still validly married, okay? So it doesn't matter what you think, it matters what you say that makes the marriage valid, all right? That's important because... like I did in my annulment video last week, my wife said, I did not allow myself to believe the personality. I'm such a crazy personality. It doesn't matter. You said the words. But now, if consent is perpetual, it's like, oh, I can't, I'm not consenting anymore. That's what it, ask me more. If you want to know more about this weird paradigm of perpetual consent, that's all marriage is today. It's perpetual consent. The object is consent. The object of consent is consent. So you are perpetually consenting, and it is consummated at death. The marriage ceremony ends at death. You are now married once you die. But before you die, you're not married because you are not finished consenting to the object, which is perpetual consent. See what I mean? This is why it's tricky. Not to digress. Okay. Rather, it must be the effect of, I, Tarzan, marry you, Jane, non-exclusively. So if he says those words, it's invalid. This is what it means for error to determine the will. And it is what St. John Paul II emphasized in his important address to the Roman Rota in 1993 and again in 2000. All right, so yeah, the error determines the will. That means if you say an error, that's what you meant. But if you say truth, that's what you meant as far as law and validity goes. So people say, yeah, my spouse was cheating on me right before the wedding. Hey, if he said the words, it's valid. You know, if he's a goofed up dude, you know, but goofed up dudes can still make contracts. The use of marriage act comment. All right, here we go. From the cases already stated, it is consequently resolved that it is lawful to use marriage for the sake of offspring, even though this need not necessarily be intended while the act is performed. Okay, that's what Alphonsus is saying. So you don't have to have it between your ears. When the act is being provided, it is not positively impeded. That is what the apostolic, the sacred penitentiary said in 1861 or whatever. As long as you're not positively impeding procreation by contraception, right? Artificial contraception, you're positively impeding the procreation. So it's like, hey, I wanted to get around this and just go here. You're positively impeding it. Hello. Natural family planning positively impedes this because you're only pursuing the secondary ends when this thing isn't in the room. So instead of creating a barrier around this to block it, all we do is we just only get near when this is not here. It's like, aren't we so smart? God's never going to figure this out at all. He has no idea that we're this smart. Duh. Nope. Structure. Otherwise, you have ruined the order. But there is no more order now because there's no primary telos. There's two teloses because we're saying that the new order is no order. It's this. You can do this or you can do this, whatever you want. So there's no order. It's all horizontal, yo. No telos. It's just, you want this? Cool. You want that? Cool. Whatever you want. As long as you're pursuing, you're open. So I'm going to pursue this and I'm open to that. And, oh, by the way, and now that unity means everything has to be, we have to have the feelings going. So effectively what all that NFP does is this is our new structure. This is our new nature. There's only one primary purpose and it's pleasure. It's unity. Okay. So everything has to be cool. All this is perpetual consent. Like I said, marital debt kills unity because you have no unity. Because the debt means, hey, do you always feel unity with the bank when you have to pay the mortgage? Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. But it doesn't matter. You have that. That's you have the obligation to pay that debt. So when you have the structure upside down, you have to have unity first. So unity is now the new number one, and this is the new order of love, they call it, and all this crazy stuff. Like I said, you can mess up marriage when you don't define terms. I could be here all night talking about this, but my brain will short circuit, and yours probably already has. Sorry. At least you can push pause and come back another day. Okay. For the sake of offspring, indeed, sometimes procreation may be even lawfully excluded by, okay, here, this is kind of juicy. All right, so here's Alphonsus. For the sake of offspring, it's lawful to use marriage for the sake of offspring, even though this need not necessarily be intended while the act is performed, provided it is not positively impeded. Okay, indeed, sometimes procreation may even be lawfully excluded by a mere wish. For example, a poor person, lest he be too heavily burdened with children. So Alphonsus is saying, look, you guys, you don't have to be thinking about, oh, I wish I would have to be. I'm hoping we're getting pregnant. I hope we're having a baby. I hope no. You don't have to think that. And that's what I used to say. And I said it recently on YouTube and stuff because that's what Aquinas was saying. But Alphonsus is like, actually, no. That's not, you don't have to be thinking it. You just have to be doing it. All right? With nature in place, with the structure, the order of procreation, which is this. So there's that. However, if you're a super holy saint and you say, Tobit, move over, here comes something holier, then you're just shooting for this only. You don't care about pleasure. You're trying not to have pleasure. Just like the saints, when they eat, they don't go for this, oh, dude, we're going to go to Ruth's Chris. It's going to be so good. We're going to have the best wine, blah, blah. Great pipe tobacco afterwards. It's going to be so great. The steak we're getting. They take some dead squirrel on the side of the road and pour gravel on it and eat it. That's an exaggeration, but you know what I mean? They do that. They'll take old cold soup and they'll put ashes in it and they'll eat that. They're trying not to up the pleasure of the food, but they do need to eat so they don't die. All right? So that's the same idea. Do you want to be, not everyone's called to that. It's like totally cool if you want to eat your Halloween candy, right? As long as you're not doing it for too much for pleasure, I suppose. You know, if you can kind of have some, be normal. That's like normal people, okay? But super saints don't do that. So if we're called to be super saints, you know, you don't have to be like Tobit and just go procreation alone in my mind. But that's good if you do. That's really cool. That's super holy because this is all fall of man stuff. It's something you don't want to mess with. Whereas now we just celebrate it. It's like, oh no, it's super holy to just do the thing. And you got to be open to life, but we're pursuing this. Life-giving love. Love is number one, and it might give life. Wrong. Life is number one, and it might give love. That's it. That's the order, and it's upside down today. With NFP, because we have to keep NFP natural, and this is natural, and we're trying not to get this. So how do we do it? Woo! That's all. That's all. We just do that. And this is why everyone contracepts, because if this is the goal to not get here, then what's wrong with doing that? Nothing. Okay, it's the same thing as just doing that. Same thing. You either do that when this isn't here, or if it's here, you do this. What's the problem? We're just using technology. We're so smart. We either use scientific methods for natural family planning, quote unquote, or scientific methods, you know, for artificial family planning. Same thing. Flip the nature to where it is naturally. Now stuff starts to make sense, Christopher Wagner. Aquinas, he says, I answer that matrimony is instituted both as an office of nature. Oh, this is good. Both as an office of nature and as a sacrament of the church. That's right. Got to remember that, an office of nature, and that is that which is in common with all animals. I could go more into that. There's a whole big list of stuff. If you want me, maybe I'll put it in the show notes. It's too much to get into. Aquinas says natural marriage is like animal marriage because that which we have in common with animals is nature. Okay, there's none of this. Well, humans are different than animals in this way. No, we both reproduce. Okay, in a natural way. Enough said on that. I'll give you all the notes on that if you want. There's a lot that I went into. There's tons of stuff on this but part of it's when you throw stuff out there, people email you things. You're like, oh, I didn't even see that. Let me get more into it. All right. Aquinas says matrimony is instituted both as an office of nature and as a sacrament of the church. That's right. As an office of nature, it is directed by two things. Like every other virtuous act, one of these is required on the part of the agent and has the intention of the due end. So this is the stuff we've already kind of talked about. Thus, offspring is a kind of good of matrimony. Alphonsus says this means no family planning. Yep. He says you do not need to have a baby names in mind. Yeah. All right. So I'm just repeating myself, but it's good to have it. So the intention of the due required on the part of the agent is the intention of the due end. And Alphonsus is saying that is respect to keeping the nature intact, not necessarily your brain waves. You don't have to be picking out baby names during the act, in other words. To avoid danger of, now here we go, more Alphonsus. To avoid danger of incontinence in oneself or in the spouse. Martinez Perez from Conic, blah, 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 against Sanchez, who holds that this venial, unless the impulses of the flesh cannot otherwise be calmed. All right. Okay, so here, it is stated that consequently resolved is, it is lawful to use marriage, number two, to the danger of incontinence in oneself or the spouse. Okay? This is venial unless the impulses of the flesh cannot otherwise be calmed. Okay, so they're saying that you can't just go whole hog on this for fun. If you really are going to burn, then you can use your remedy of concupiscence. But you don't use remedy of concupiscence for entertainment purposes or strictly for pleasure. That's the point. Okay. For the same ends which may be had, contracting marriage also make lawful the asking for copulation. We've already repeated that. We've said that. Same ends. You're allowed to pursue remedy of concupiscence as an end in itself. You don't have to be pursuing procreation. That having been said, the order of nature must be preserved when you're talking about all this. The reason why it gets super funky is because this is the new order, and it gets crazy. And that's why you got Timothy Gordon saying, as long as you're just keeping the nuts and bolts in place, nothing matters. No. You have to have procreation in the first position. So you can't be looking to try to bypass this. No. Don't even think about this. Don't think about touching the Ark of the Covenant. Don't think about touching the natural structure. For the sake of health, or because of extrinsic ends, for what is honest by its own nature and referred to one and may lawfully be referred to another does not oppose. All right. However, to use for health alone is probably venial, as St. Thomas say. So, the conjugal act can be a problem. It can be sinful. You got to watch out. It's not just like playtime. It's not just like the more the better. No, that's theology of the body goo. All right. And it can get you into trouble. This is just for remedy of concupiscence if you can't get by. So your best bet is to just use it to get pregnant only. But if you want to kind of be normal like everybody else, you can remedy of concupiscence it. Right. And you got to follow your conscience if it's like you're too into the pleasure thing. So take it easy, man. That's what, because you start playing with this stuff. It's like alcohol. Hey, it's a party. What's the problem? Well, yeah, now you can become an alcoholic if you start getting too into it. That's what. So you can get too into this, and it takes on a life of its own. Hello, horse and mule, right? I got ants crawling around here. That's why I keep doing this. So I left some candy out here or something at one point. Saint Alphonsus says the use of the marital act is illicit, but not more than venially, if it is engaged in solely for pleasure. This is important. This is something I referred to earlier. Unless the pleasure is directed toward the good of procreation, or in order to make the man fit to render marital duty. Okay. This is why okay, so hold on. What did he just say? This is important. The use of the marital act is venially sinful. Oh, wait. The use of the marital act is illicit, but not more than venially if it is engaged in solely for pleasure. Unless the pleasure is directed towards the good of the spouse, procreation. Okay. What did he just say? This is big. Listen to this. He's going, look, if you're 20-something years old with normal fertility and you are pursuing pleasure only, the use of the marital act is illicit if it is engaged in solely for pleasure, unless the pleasure is directed towards the good of procreation. So he's like, look, dude, if you're totally into the pleasure, that can be okay as long as the pleasure is directed towards the good of procreation. So, you can be pursuing this, I guess. Am I contradicting myself? I'm just reading Alphonsus, man. The point is that don't mess with the nature, and it's kind of cool. So your time to shine is, between age 16 and age 45. That's it. Because it's directed towards the good of procreation. So knock yourself out, because just don't do any family planning at all. God has a way of taking care of all this stuff. Having 20 kids is its own kind of family planning, all right? It's going to take care of stuff. It's going to keep the perspective. So just let nature take its course and let God keep the structure he put in place to make everything work out. If you start trying to tweak God's stuff, look around you. We got all sorts of problems. So Alphonsus is like, look, it's cool as long as it's directed toward procreation. If you start, but NFP is not directed toward the good of procreation. NFP is directed towards something else because it's only around when there's no the procreation is out of the room. It's next week. That's what are you directing towards? Oh, bonding and stuff because that's natural. And if procreation happens, no. It's not directed toward procreation. Alphonsus totally rejects NFP. Get it out of your brain. But he's saying, look, man, if what is in your brain is not as important as what's in your nature. And you have to, he says, you got to read Aquinas the right way. What else did I write here? This is why post-menopause relations or during pregnancy relations is less liberal in permission. No procreation possible. Hello, that's right. This is where the problem with what Timothy Gordon is saying. He's like, hey, during pregnancy, whatever the heck you want. Menopause, whatever you want. No, it's after menopause, the party kind of ends, and it's just for remedy of concupiscence, dude, because there's no procreation around. So if you're going to cruise for pleasure after menopause, venial sin. But if it's just remedy of so the high water mark is age 25, man. You're having all these kids. Everything's like in the yes column, gray, hormonally, everything. Stuff goes down the other side. You start getting into 40s, 50s, 60s. What do you think? Back to remedy of concupiscence. So God doesn't cut you off, man. And this makes sense, too. Look, like my son said, he's kind of thinking about it. He's like, yeah, that's your wife. You know, this is menopause. I mean, look, kind of makes sense. So, and what does nature say? When you're young and you're fertile, she's in the mood. When she's 65 and not fertile, not really in the mood. Okay, so things kind of, nature's like, hey, remedy of concupiscence only, you know, it's like, come on. And then she isn't, you see what okay, I don't need to talk more about that. I think you guys are catching on what I'm saying. By the way, that's Saint Francis de Sales will say that. He says, I could say more, but I'm keeping it modest. And that's one thing that all these new, Christopher West and Janet Smith and everybody, they just say sex over and over, and that's all they say that word, just like their work at Planned Parenthood. Casti Canubi never uses that word as a noun, and all these saints and stuff, they use euphemisms or they hint at these things because it's not supposed to be like, okay, modesty. NFP and modesty do not go together. I've never seen it. Aquinas, I answer that since no proceeding. Okay, what is this? What are we talking about here? Since no act proceeding from a deliberate will is indifferent, as stated in the second book, I guess that's whoever they killed. What's the guy's name? Socrates, somebody. The marriage act is either always sinful. Okay, this is the quote from that was taken. I talked about it last time from Archbishop Fulton Sheen took it, and then our good buddy, our friend, Father Mike Schmitz takes it and says, hey, if you're in a state of grace, knock yourself out. You're getting holier all the time. If this is the order, he's right. If you don't have to be pursuing procreation, you know what I mean? But you have to, because the marital act doesn't need to be excused, because this is all Trinitarian love bombing grooviness. So it doesn't need to be excused. This is just God's gift of Trinitarian love, and we're trying to elevate you to love. So just do more of the, no. The conjugal act produces more original sin, and it's bad. It's fornication in marriage unless it is made honest through procreation, physically, naturally. But you are also, at one honest end is remedy of concupiscence. but the natural purpose is not remedy of concupiscence. That's not the natural purpose. There's only one purpose, and that's procreation. Which is why I was splitting hairs earlier in this video to get this straightened out, ironed out. Since no act proceeding from a deliberate will is indifferent, as stated in the second book, the marriage act is always either sinful or meritorious in one who is in a state of grace. That's right. For if the motive for the marriage act be a virtue, whether of justice, that they may render the debt, okay, or religion, that they may beget children. So having children is an act of religion. This is why they say when you're taking contraception takes God out of the act, because it's not an act of religion, because you're not trying to get pregnant. When you do NFP, you're taking God out of the act because you're not trying to get pregnant. You're trying for this. You're taking God out of the act. You can still get pregnant, maybe, because it's maybe, but you can also still get pregnant with contraception, maybe. Okay. Either way, you're trying to get God out of our act. Get God out. We want God out because we want the stuff, and we don't want God. That's all family planning is. It is, so therefore it's meritorious if you're offering the debt or you're trying to get pregnant. It's meritorious. It's not, I don't think it's merit, but if the motive be, so I don't think it's meritorious per se to be pursuing remedy of concupiscence. I guess it's okay. It's a Let me see before I answer that. Let's just see what else that they say here as we continue. But if the motive be lust, yet not excluding the marriage blessings, that means if you're pursuing this, but you got your nature intact, namely that he would by no means be willing to go to another woman, procreation. So if you're keeping procreation and education intact, but you're pursuing lust, it is venial sin. That is correct. But like we said earlier, man, if it's primarily lust, if you're pursuing a little bit of this, enough of this, 50% or better, if you're trying to do remedy of concupiscence primarily. Okay, so the overall theme here is try to get pregnant and reserve other times for remedy of concupiscence. If you're not trying to get pregnant, you shouldn't be doing the act. But if you got to, it's still legal. It's still okay, and it's not necessarily a sin. This is the point they're saying. Just like I use that analogy of alcohol. Some alcohol is good. Doesn't mean all alcohol is good. The more you drink, the holier you get. Woohoo! That'll sell. Yeah. That's why they call it spirits, right? Let's go get some spirits. Holy Spirit, anyone? I'll take a few fifths of Jack Daniels and I'm going to get extremely holy. I'll be speaking in tongues in no time. While if he exclude the marriage blessings, no procreation, so as to dispose the act in like manner with any woman, it is a mortal sin. So if you take marriage act and get rid of procreation education, it's mortal sin. And how do you get rid of procreation education? Through a method of family planning. You can use a physical method. They're all physical methods because nature is physical. The conjugal act is physical. Every method of family planning is physical. It is an act to actualize your physical family planning. Any family planning that is strictly mental is stupid. It's like, I'm going to drive my car with my mind. You have to drive it physically or it doesn't go anywhere. Every type of family planning involves physical. So you take your procreation education out, the marriage blessings out, mortal sin. This is why NFP is mortal sin. And what is it? 1 Timothy 2:15. She will be saved if she continue in childbearing. Continue. This says, I'm not continuing. I'm continuing in love bearing, but not childbearing. Nope. Okay. And nature cannot move without being either directed by reason, and thus it will be an act of virtue, or not so directed that it will be an act of lust. Okay. Nature cannot move without being either directed by reason, then it's virtuous, or directed unreasonably, then it will be an act of lust. You got to use reason if you're doing the act. And so reason, therefore it'll be an act of virtue. It's an act of virtue if you're using reason. And we have to be reasonable about what is the purpose of the conjugal act. What does nature say? It's procreation. Otherwise, we're not being reasonable. We're just playing with things, and we're saying, "Oh no, this is it's all about the love, whatever. It's whatever you want, whatever. It doesn't matter. You just pick your thing." Let's read a little St. Francis de Sales, Intro to the Devout Life, French version. This is good. In like manner, nuptial commerce. See how they say that? They don't see that, Janet Smith? Well, you have sex and I have sex, and when you're having no, shut up. We don't talk that way. That's stupid. That's Planned Parenthood stuff. No. Look at St. Francis de Sales. In like manner, nuptial commerce, which is so holy, just, and commendable in itself, and so profitable to the commonwealth, is nevertheless, in certain cases, dangerous to those that exercise it. What do you mean? We're just pursuing love. What's dangerous about it? For it frequently debilitates the soul with venial sin. Wow, it frequently debilitates the soul with venial sin. Really? As in cases of mere and simple excess. Excess of what? Excess of purity. Excess of pleasure, excuse me. Okay? So it can be, I guess, if you, as long as you have procreation in place, like I said earlier, Alphonsus says, knock yourself out as long as you have procreation in place. As long as you're not trying to avoid babies. So there it frequently deliberates with simple excess if you're trying to pursue pleasure 100%, and there's no, I guess if the baby's like nursing, and you're going to get pregnant, or it's during pregnancy, okay? That happens a lot, because if you're getting pregnant all the time, you're pregnant a lot. Or menopause, okay? That's where simple excess can enter. And sometimes it kills effectually by mortal sin. Hear that, Father Mike Schmitz? So if you're in a state of grace, you can still get venial or mortal sin in this conjugal act. As when what? St. Francis de Sales, what are you talking about? When the order appointed for the procreation of children is violated and perverted. What order appointed for the procreation of children? What are you talking about? This order. Procreation primary, coming first, okay? So it's a mortal sin when the order is violated and perverted, a perversion of the right order, which we're going to get into in a minute with a few minutes with Casti 59. In which case, according as one departs more or less from it, the sins are more or less abominable. How do we depart from how do we pervert and violate the order? Onan steps up to the plate number 1, and that's pretty doggone abominable. He changes the order because he pursues this independent of this. He's like, I want this, but I don't want that. And so I'm going to take a natural step to get one of these two or a combination, and I don't want this. Boom, dead, gone, see ya, death, hello. But what other way can we depart and violate and pervert the order? Because we don't want this. How do we do it? Well, we're so tricky with NFP now, we only do this when we know this isn't around. So we're using technology to manipulate our nature. So we're thwarting the process through calendar restriction. We're thwarting nature by not letting nature achieve its purpose ever. So instead of blocking this, we just don't do this when we know this is going to happen. So We're telling God, hey, we got you outsmarted God. We got you figured out, man. Guess what, NFP? We have the technology now to outflank you. We got a workaround to increase and multiply. You didn't figure that out, God, did you? You didn't know we were going to figure this one out, but we did. Hey, it's been really fun, and it's getting more fun all the time. No, it's not even fun. The dads hate NFP, and the moms hate NFP, and they go to church, and they hate each other because they're super resentful. But she's like, I'm going to grin and bear it because I don't want to have 17 kids. And he's like, I'm going to grin and bear it because otherwise we're going to be complete zeros, and I don't want to do that. It's bad. The solution is have a bunch of kids. That's your solution. Or we'll all be Muslim. Which do you prefer? Okay. Always moral. For the procreation of children being the principal end of marriage. Makes sense. Principal, primary, single, one, essential. One may never lawfully depart from the order which that end requires. You can't never lawfully depart from the order which... So, order of nature. Doesn't matter what's in your mind. It matters what's in physical. Okay? NFP is a manipulation of the physical to get a different physical outcome than would normally occur with nature. Though on account of some accident or circumstance, it cannot be at that time be brought about, such as what happens. Okay, so listen to this. So, one may not lawfully depart from the order, except for some accident of circumstance, it cannot at that time be brought about, such as happens when barrenness or pregnancy prevents generation. In these occurrences, so they're saying when menopause or pregnancy prevents generation. In these occurrences, corporal commerce, hear that, Janet Smith? Corporal commerce may still be just and holy. Really? So it's not a venial sin automatically? No. May still be just and holy, provided the rules of generation be followed. So it's not just and holy if you violate the rules of generation during pregnancy or during menopause. What are those rules of generation? You cannot be pursuing pleasure alone. That's the rule of generation at those times. You can use the conjugal act as a remedy of concupiscence. So that's between you and God. There's where Kermit the Frog has got it right. He says that's none of my business. We don't get to decide about what's going on. That's your private thing, man. It's like, hey, whether I was in this for pleasure or if I was in this for remedy of concupiscence, obviously that's your bag. Okay, so you got to provide. That's why it's venial sin territory. Remedy of concupiscence only in menopause, pregnancy, because there's no procreation available. That's right. So there's that. I could probably talk more. Any questions? Don't be shy in the comment section. A little more Cornelius a Lapide. All right. I permit the act of copulation by way of indulgence. I do not prescribe it. Nay, St. Augustine says, I say this by way of pardon. The Greek word denotes forgiveness, and hence St. Augustine gathers that it is. So here we're going to take a Lapide and try to mix him in with Aquinas, okay? Like I said from the beginning, we're this hermeneutic of continuity with Aquinas and Alphonsus. St. Augustine gathers that it is a venial sin to have sexual connection. Not for the sake of children, but for carnal pleasure. Okay. And to avoid the temptation of Satan, for pardon is given to what is sinful. So when you read that, you're like, wow, okay, so it's venial sin, not for the sake, it's venial sin, not for the sake of children. Or even if you're avoiding the pardon to given, even if you're avoiding the temptation of Satan. So if you're pursuing pleasure or you're pursuing remedy of concupiscence, I just read that that's venial sin. But hold on. So too, indulgence is given in what concerns sin, or at all events a lesser good, as St. Thomas has rightly observed. So, or a Lapide in the 1600s or whatever, before even Alphonsus, is saying, look, it's an indulgence which concerns sin, or at all events, a lesser good. So an indulgence is not necessarily sin, but it can be just a lesser good. Ding, ding, ding. Hello. I really wish I had one of those bells I could ring like that. So there is the little wrinkle which St. Alphonsus helped me to see in what Lapide said. 1 Corinthians 7:6. I say this by way of indulgence, so you can pursue remedy of concupiscence. It's a lesser good. That's why it's a little darker color, right? This is what you want to kind of avoid. This is saint material. This is body material, okay? And then this is just motivation. All right. So you can use the motivation as long as it's directed in the right place. That's the point. And you basically have in your mind that's what it's supposed to be for. Difficult task, but achieved. See how long we've been talking? See how kind of confusing this can get? You have to comb this out. And if you start saying it's about love or it's about the inseparable love, you have ruined the order. You have no order, no primary purpose, and you got a multi-chessboard going on. That's why Christian Wagner said it was going to be tough to get it all straight. He was right. It is tough, but I'm helping because we're once you kill all NFP, it makes it a lot easier. All right, now we're going to get into a little bit of Casti Connubii, okay? So they blend 58 and 59 together, and let's see what they say. This is kind of cool. As for the reasons given to justify the misuse of marriage, okay, it is not uncommon to silence those who are. This is French into English. We just tried a little change of pace. So there's a lot of people who want to justify misusing marriage, aka family planning. They're saying, I deserve family planning because, and that's all, it was all the rage in 1930. It is not uncommon to silence those who are ashamed for these reasons to be feigned or it is not uncommon for these reasons to be feigned or exaggerated. So people tend to, they tend to exaggerate their reasons. Okay. Nevertheless, church, blah, 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 blah. Okay, so sympathize. Okay, nevertheless, the church, that pious mother, understands and sympathizes with what is said about the mother's health and danger threatening her life. So they're saying, look, I could die if I have another baby. Ever heard that one before? Uh-huh. The church understands. And who would, and listen to what he says. This is what the Pope says in 1930. Who could not reflect on this without being moved with pity? Who could not conceive the highest admiration for the mother who offers herself with heroic courage to almost certain death to preserve the life of the child once conceived? What she will have suffered to fully fulfill her natural duty. God alone in all his riches and mercy, God will be able to reward him, and surely he will do so not only fully but abundantly. Okay. You think you're going to die if you have another baby? Have heroic courage. This is what God is saying. He's not saying, oh, you can use family. No. That's why in Casti Connubii it says, no reason, however grave. You can't take the natural order and change it, no matter how grave. If it's that grave, don't do it. But if you're going to do it, trust in God. And you might, you know what I mean? Hey, some husbands work themselves to death. Some people die in childbirth. God will reward you. It's like, you know, it's the way it goes. It's heroic virtue. But now Margaret Sanger's like, no. And everyone's like, hard case. Okay, family. So this natural family planning was a political fix. It's not a natural fix. The church also knows this very well. Okay. The church also knows this very well. It is not uncommon for one spouse to suffer sin more than commit it, when for a very serious reason he allows the perversion of the right order to occur. What's that? It's when someone starts pursuing getting rid of this, the perversion of the right order. So we're going to pursue other things, and we're going to cut this out. We're perverting the wrong. So we're hold on. I'm talking too much. Let's just read it. The church knows very well this is not uncommon for one spouse to suffer more than another, to commit for serious reason. He allows the perversion of the right order. You can't allow mortal sin. Wait a minute. Let's listen. Allows the perversion of the order to occur that he himself does not desire. He remains innocent, therefore, provided that he remembers the law of charity and does not neglect to dissuade and turn his spouse away from sin. Okay, so they're talking about this NFP stuff that's going on. All right, they're like, hey, what about NFP? It's all the rage these days. Pius XI, haven't you heard about it? Okay, we have very, very grave reason. All right, so we wanted we want to quote pervert the order, but we're going to call it natural family planning, and we're going to do the conjugal act without this. We're only going to do the conjugal act when this isn't in the room. Then we're going to pervert the order. So we're going like this. That's what we're doing. We're doing this. And we're open. Maybe, we're open. We're perverting. You can allow that as the innocent spouse because it's not intrinsically evil up front. It is natural, but not immediately unnatural. Like artificial contraception is immediately unnatural. But this isn't, because it takes a month to do this, all right? It's timed. Just like onanism is not immediately illicit, but it is at the finish. NFP is not immediately illicit because you're just doing a natural conjugal act. However, you're only doing it takes a month for the NFP to actually, because you're doing the natural conjugal act, but you're not doing it when you otherwise would. So you've created an unnatural. You create a violation. You've changed. You've perverted the order. So that's the sin. NFP is the sin in Casti 59. Nor should spouses who exercise their rights according to the sound and natural reason, which means procreation primary, be accused of unnatural acts if for natural reasons, either due to temporary circumstances like monthly cycles or to certain physical defects, a new life can result. So it's not unnatural just to do the act if pregnancy doesn't happen because God's in charge of this. You're not in charge of this. And you don't get to play with it. Indeed, both in marriage itself and in the application of matrimony, there are secondary ends, mutual support, maintenance of reciprocal. So there are secondary ends, remedy of concupiscence, and here's the mutual support, maintenance of reciprocal love, all this stuff. Okay, it's all in here, combination. Spouses are not at all forbidden to consider, provided that the intrinsic nature of this act is safeguarded. Okay, the intrinsic nature of this act is safeguarded. What does that mean? We're not messing with the intrinsic nature and what its purpose is, and thereby its subordination to the primary end is preserved. You got to have subordination to the primary end to have intrinsic nature. That's what's up. And when you start unsubordinating the end by using artificial contraception or by using timing, then the intrinsic nature is not being preserved. That's not subordinated to the primary end. Okay. So when it comes to menopause, this still works because the intrinsic nature is being safeguarded, and you're pursuing you're not violating the primary end. So this is where you can say you're open to life. Okay, and again, you have to be pursuing only remedy of concupiscence, not pleasure alone, because there's no procreation in the picture at that time. We already covered that. NFPers say procreation or to pay the debt equals. Wait, let me hang on a second. Let me push pause and think about this for a minute. Okay, I remember what I was going to say. You hear the NFPers will say, look, you can use even Aquinas says you can use the conjugal act either to choose to get pregnant, or you can use the conjugal act to pay the debt. So that's all NFP is doing. We're just paying the debt with it. We're We're just doing the marital debt. That's all. We don't have to try to get pregnant. You're just doing the marital debt. So NFP is natural. That's it. It's your other end that you can use. Okay. The debt payment. Wait a minute. What does Alphonsus say? There would indeed be disorder if the primary end were ordered to the secondary. All right. So that is what is going on when you do NFP. You are disordering because you're taking your primary end and you're ordering it to the secondary. So you're saying, hello, primary end. I see you there. Procreation. We're going to order it to the secondary. Watch this. Whoop. We're going to flip it over. And now we're going to call it life-giving love. And we're going to pursue our love and we might get to the life. Okay. So what we're doing is we're just taking what Aquinas says we're changing nature to get there. Can't do it. But then he says, but if not, among the two lawful ends, the secondary end is chosen before the primary. That's what I said before. I'm repeating myself, but it's worth repeating. So when you're choosing remedy of concupiscence, as long as you don't take procreation out of its rightful place, which is primary. And anytime you family plan, you plan to remove procreation from the primary purpose. That's it. That's it. It's so simple. That's why everyone knows it's birth control. That's why they call it controlling birth in Humanae Vitae. That's why when you type up natural birth control, it's what it is. It's so obvious, but we're playing word games. And when you do that, you've destroyed the natural basis, which is why Christian Wagner is having trouble figuring it out. All right. Saint Clement of Alexandria, 195 AD. To a spiritual man after conception, his wife is as a sister and treated as if the same father. So you treat your wife as a sister after she's pregnant. To the spiritual man, hello. That doesn't mean that it's always a venial sin during pregnancy, like I have said before, because I was reading Aquinas without the rest of it. Now that we've got the Alphonsus translated and stuff and see it with a new lens, no, to the spiritual man. So St. Clement of Alexandria in 195 AD was correct. To a spiritual man, his wife is as a sister. So to the natural man, it's still weird because it's not there. Why are you trying to get someone pregnant who's already pregnant? You have the right to remedy of concupiscence. You have a right to get married for that purpose. It's not the best purpose. It's legal. And if you put too much pleasure into the situation, it can be venial sin. And that's between you and God, but that's what's up. Now, let's get to our juicy, scandalous, whatever, theology of the body devil problem. Look at this. I'll try to make it a little bit bigger here, I guess. Let me see if I can do that. This one. Let me see if I can change this. There's a guy right here, Luke so-and-so, and I saw him on Christian Wagner's video about Zionism. What does he say? He says, pray for me. I delved into Gnosticism because I was searching for a heterosexual bridal mysticism where my soul as a man would be masculine and God would be feminine instead of Jesus God as masculine and my soul feminine. But demons entered into my life. I just don't like Catholic bridal mysticism, but every time I go to Mass, it's in my head. Wow. Weird. He's probably going to Novus Ordo, okay, because you are God when they do the consecration to you. But look. Bridal mysticism, what could that possibly be? That is dripping with Christopher West, because the conjugal act is no more nature for procreation. It's Trinitarian love primarily, okay, with procreation sprinkled on top just in case. It's life-giving love. Love is number one. We got to go through the love to get the life. And we have to go through the love first. The love is primary. If the love is primary and we're not feeling the love, we got to figure out how we're going to do that. And how do we do that? Well, if you want to feel more goth, you really got to get into the makeup and you got to get into the music and you really got to get the boots and you really got to amp it up. And then you got to start putting knitting needles through your forehead and really
tattooing yourself to death, and and then listen to the music and the whole bit. If you're really going to get your Trinitarian love going in your marriage, and you feel like it's just nature, you know what I mean? Like you're just you start trying to get into heterosexual bridal mysticism, and you try real hard to listen to your Christopher West how-to tapes of getting your Trinitarian love groove on, man, and strapping those rocket ships to the sky and all this weird, crazy stuff, which is what Timothy Gordon correctly calls Christopher West fruitcake. The problem is Timothy Gordon is just on deck fruitcake because he's saying that love wins. That's his. Timothy Gordon is undermining his entire position of patriarchy when you start saying love wins. That's all he wish he would talk, but anyway. So there's that. And I want to talk to this Luke guy at some point more, but that's that. We've come to the very end. We finally got here, you guys. So I've been meaning to get this done because it's really important to get Alphonsus straightened out so we get marriage more in the yes column as far as what's allowed and we should do. If you're not against NFP, you're not on the team, so go out there and stay toxic to the environment. Have lots of kids.
On a baby, I know it sounds crazy, but let's make forever tonight. And there's no one here but you and me. We've been through it, yeah, we've been everywhere and in between. Yeah, making the complicated easy. Felt every kind of feeling, past every test, boxes checked. I'm ready for what comes next. Let's make a baby. Can we make something new? Oh, baby. Hope they got eyes like you. Let's make a baby. Baby, maybe even two. Let's do what